When looking at the Johari's window, we realize that there are 4 quadrants that indicate how much information we have about ourselves. In the same way, I found as I was working with clients that questions are asked in 4 quadrants as well. And these 4 quadrants are also indicated by the knowledge we have or lack, and the knowledge that others have or lack on their part. I call this the question quadrants. Let's populate these quadrants. Firstly, we know that there's a tension between ourselves and others in questioning. It is between us and the other person that this interaction happens. When we look at ourselves and the other person, we realize that there are some questions that are asked in what we call the first quadrant. In this quadrant, we know the answer and the other person knows the answer. And yet we still ask the question. Most of the time, this question is asked to disprove the other person and prove our point. In the second quadrant, we don't know the answer to this question, but we expect the other person to, and therefore we ask the question to gain more insight. In the third quadrant, we know the answer and we know the other person does not, and yet we still ask the question so that the other person can have the opportunity to think this through and possibly find the answer for themselves. We ask a question that we don't know the answer to, and the other person also doesn't know the answer to. I found that with most of my clients, this is the most scary questioning quadrant that they could move into. This is the most powerful quadrant though. You see, in this quadrant, insight is grown like never before. It is amazing how much new insight can be developed when we just ask questions that we don't know the answer to, and we know the other person also doesn't know the answer to that question. What percentage do you ask in each one of these quadrants? Are you mainly asking questions in quadrant 1? And if that's the case, what does it say about your opinion of other people's knowledge? Do you ask mainly in quadrant 2? And if that is the case, are you just out to gain information or are you growing information? Quadrant 3, if you're asking mainly in this quadrant, are you mainly aiming at growing other person's insight, or is this possibly part of a belittling exercise where you want to make the person feel less valued? This quadrant is probably the most misunderstood quadrant. When used correctly, it can empower people. When used with pride and without humility, it can disempower people greatly. Quadrant 4. How many questions do you ask in this quadrant? I find that if they give any percentage, it's about 5% of the total questions they ask are in quadrant 4. What does that say? Are you fearful of being caught out that you don't know? Do you feel that you need to know everything? Or can you just live with not knowing everything and ask questions that will grow insight into an area that all of us don't know anything about? When we look at quadrant 1, in this quadrant we preserve our own knowledge. Quadrant 2, we gain insight. Quadrant 3, we share insight. Quadrant 4 is where we grow insight. Looking at empowerment, quadrant 1 is normally disempowering. Quadrant 2 would be self-empowering. Quadrant 3 is other empowering, and Quadrant 4 is all empowering. In Quadrant 4, everyone grows. Everyone gains insight. But we can only go there when we are prepared to ask the questions and be vulnerable to some extent. What does your choice of quadrants say about your opinion of others? Even our society, we've lost one magic tool that we had in all of the older societies. In the ancient societies, you always found people honoring good questioning more than good answering. It would revolutionize the way we do business, the way we interact with each other, if we started to teach ourselves better questioning skills again. Have fun.